The Greek understanding of the world started with mythological narratives explaining the origins of the cosmos, humanity, and the divine order, forming the cultural bedrock of Greek civilization. Initially, there was a vast, formless void known as chaos. From this primordial emptiness emerged Gaia, the first being and the mother of all creation, embodying solidity and eternity. Gaia then brought forth Uranus to envelop her, the mountains to crown her, and Pontus to encircle her shores. From the union of Gaia and Uranus came the 12 Titans, immense and powerful deities. Among them, Cronus was the youngest and most cunning. Uranus, fearing his children, imprisoned them within Gaia, causing her immense suffering. In retaliation, Gaia crafted a great adamantine sickle and gave it to Cronus, who used it to castrate his father. From Uranus's spilled blood arose the Erinyes, Furies, the giants, and the Melii, ash tree nymphs. From the sea foam generated by his severed genitals, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, emerged. Cronus then assumed cosmic rule, taking his sister Rhea as his consort. However, like his father, Cronus feared being overthrown by his own children. A prophecy foretold his deposition by his offspring, leading him to swallow each child Rhea bore: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. When Zeus was born, Rhea tricked Cronus by presenting him with a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes, which he swallowed instead. Zeus was secretly raised on Crete. Upon reaching maturity, Zeus forced Cronus to regurgitate his swallowed siblings. With his brothers and sisters liberated, Zeus led them in the Titanomachy, a decade-long war against the Titans. Aided by the 100-handed ones and the Cyclopes, whom Zeus freed from Tartarus, the younger gods ultimately triumphed. The defeated Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus, the deepest part of the underworld. The cosmos then came under the dominion of Zeus and his siblings, the Olympians. Following their victory, the Olympian gods established a divine hierarchy to govern the cosmos. Zeus claimed sovereignty over the sky and became the king of the gods, wielding the thunderbolt crafted for him by the Cyclopes. His brother Poseidon was granted authority over the seas, rivers, and earthquakes, while Hades received dominion over the underworld and the dead. These three brothers essentially divided the world among themselves. Their sisters also assumed crucial roles. Hera became Zeus's wife and queen, presiding over marriage and childbirth. Demeter governed agriculture and the harvest, and Hestia attended the sacred hearth, symbolizing domestic life and religious sacrifice. Other Olympians soon joined this divine family. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, sprang fully formed and armored from Zeus's head. Apollo became the god of light, music, prophecy, and healing, while his twin sister Artemis ruled over the hunt, wilderness, and young women. Ares presided over warfare, particularly its brutal and chaotic aspects. Aphrodite governed love, beauty, and desire. Hephaestus, the divine craftsman, mastered fire and metallurgy. Hermes served as the messenger of the gods and a guide to travelers, merchants, and the recently deceased. Dionysus became the god of wine, festivity, theater, and ecstatic release. Each deity possessed distinct domains of influence, specific symbols, and sacred animals. Their complex relationships, conflicts, and alliances mirrored human social structures, providing explanatory narratives for both natural phenomena and social institutions. The Greeks did not perceive their gods as perfect or morally flawless. Instead, the Olympians displayed human traits magnified to divine proportions, including jealousy, lust, anger, compassion, wisdom, and folly. Humanity's origins in Greek mythology are intricately connected to Prometheus, a titan who sided with Zeus during the Titanomachy. According to Hesiod, Prometheus fashioned humans from clay, and Athena then breathed life into these creations. As the patron and champion of mortals, Prometheus aimed to improve their condition. When Zeus instituted the practice of sacrifice, requiring humans to honor the gods with a portion of their food, Prometheus devised a plan to favor mortals. He divided a sacrificial bull into two portions, one containing valuable meat hidden beneath unappetizing oxhide, and the other consisting of bones concealed beneath glistening fat. Given the choice, Zeus selected the seemingly appealing portion of fat-covered bones, thereby establishing the tradition of humans sacrificing bones and fat to the gods while retaining the meat for themselves. Enraged by this deception, Zeus withheld fire from humanity, leaving them cold and unable to cook food or develop technology. Prometheus, unwilling to see his creation suffer, stole fire from the gods, either from Hephaestus's forge or from the sun itself, and delivered it to humans in a hollow fennel stalk. This act of defiance incurred Zeus's wrath. He ordered Prometheus chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where an eagle would daily devour his liver, which regenerated each night due to his immortality, ensuring eternal torment. Centuries later, Heracles would free Prometheus during his labors. Zeus also punished humanity by instructing Hephaestus to create Pandora, the first woman. She was endowed with gifts from various gods, including beauty, persuasiveness, and skill in crafts, but also curiosity and deceit. She was sent to Prometheus's brother, Epimetheus, with a sealed jar, often mistranslated as a box. Despite Prometheus's warning against accepting gifts from Zeus, Epimetheus welcomed Pandora, who eventually opened the jar, releasing all manner of evils, diseases, and hardships into the world. Only hope remained trapped inside, explaining both humanity's suffering and its enduring capacity for optimism despite adversity. Hesiod's works and days presents a narrative of gradual human decline through 5 successive ages. The first humans lived during the Golden Age under Cronus's rule, a time of perfect harmony, abundance without labor, and peace. Humans lived like gods, free from suffering, aging gradually without infirmity before peacefully passing into the afterlife. These souls became benevolent spirits watching over later generations. The Silver Age, beginning under Zeus's reign, produced a markedly inferior humanity. Childlike beings who remained with their mothers for 100 years and, upon reaching adulthood, lived briefly in foolish discord before dying, refusing to honor the gods. These souls became blessed underworld spirits. Next came the Bronze Age, populated by a warlike race created from ash trees, obsessed with violence and might. They eventually destroyed themselves through constant warfare, and descended unnamed into Hades. The Heroic Age, the only upward trend in this otherwise degenerative sequence, produced the great heroes of myth who fought at Thebes and Troy. These demigods, superior to those of the Bronze Age in justice and virtue, achieved great deeds before meeting their fates. The worthiest among them were transported to the Isles of the Blessed, where they lived in paradise under the rule of Cronus. Finally came Hesiod's own time, the Iron Age, an era of constant labor, suffering, dishonor, and moral decay. In this fallen state, children dishonor parents, brothers fight brothers, and oaths and justice lose significance. Hesiod predicted this age would end when humans are born with gray hair at their temples, signaling Zeus's destruction of this race as well. This myth reinforces Greek pessimism about moral progress while simultaneously exalting their heroic past, positioning contemporary Greeks as descendants of a superior ancestry to which they must aspire despite inevitable decline. The mythic age reached its zenith in the stories of heroes, mortals of extraordinary ability, often of semi-divine parentage, who exemplified Greek virtues and established the paradigms of heroic achievement. Heracles, known to Romans as Hercules, son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene, embodied physical strength and endurance. Persecuted from birth by Hera's jealousy, he faced his greatest challenge after killing his own children in a fit of madness sent by the goddess. As atonement, he was commanded to perform 12 seemingly impossible labors, slaying the Nemean lion and the Lernaean hydra, capturing the Ceryneian hind, Erymanthian boar, and Cretan bull, clearing the Augean stables, driving away the Stymphalian birds, capturing the mares of Diomedes, obtaining Hippolyta's girdle, stealing Geryon's cattle, retrieving the golden apples of the Hesperides, and capturing Cerberus from the underworld. Through these labors, Heracles journeyed across the known world and beyond, establishing his reputation as the greatest of heroes. His apotheosis, transformation into a god upon his death, represented the highest achievement possible for a mortal. Perseus, son of Zeus and Danae, embodied cunning and divine favor. When his grandfather, Acrisius, fearing a prophecy that his grandson would kill him, cast mother and child adrift in a wooden chest, the sea carried them safely to Seriphos. Years later, King Polydectes, desiring Danae, sent Perseus on what seemed a suicide mission to bring back the head of Medusa, whose gaze turned men to stone. Aided by Athena and Hermes, Perseus acquired winged sandals, a reflective shield, a curved sword, a cap of invisibility, and a special sack. Using the shield as a mirror to avoid direct eye contact, he beheaded Medusa as she slept. From her severed neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior with a golden sword. During his return journey, Perseus rescued Andromeda from a sea monster, established several cities, and accidentally fulfilled the prophecy by killing his grandfather with a stray discus during athletic games. Theseus, identified with Athens' civic ideals, represented heroism and service to civilization. Son of Aegeus or possibly Poseidon and Aethra, he journeyed from Treason to Athens, defeating bandits and monsters along the way. In Athens, he volunteered to join the tribute of 14 youths sent to Crete, where King Minos imprisoned them in the labyrinth to be devoured by the Minotaur, a creature half man and half bull. With the help of Minos's daughter, Ariadne, and her ball of thread, Theseus navigated the labyrinth, slew the Minotaur, and led the Athenian youths to freedom. Though he abandoned Ariadne on Naxos, either by choice or divine intervention, Theseus returned to Athens where he eventually became king. He unified Attica under Athenian governance, instituted democratic reforms, and established religious festivals, making him both a monster slayer and a civilization builder. Jason led the Argonauts, a company of Greece's greatest heroes, including Heracles, Orpheus, and the Dioscuri, on the quest for the Golden Fleece. When his uncle Peleus usurped the throne of Iolcus, Jason was sent on this seemingly impossible mission as a precondition for reclaiming his birthright. With a ship built by Argus under Athena's guidance, the heroes undertook a voyage across the Black Sea to Colchis, overcoming numerous obstacles through combined strength, skill, and divine assistance. In Colchis, King Aeetes set impossible tasks for Jason, who succeeded only with help from the king's daughter, the sorceress Medea, who had fallen in love with him. After obtaining the fleece, Jason and Medea fled, eventually reaching Iolcus. Their story ended tragically when Jason later abandoned Medea for a political marriage, prompting her murderous revenge. These hero myths, while entertaining, served crucial cultural functions. They connected aristocratic families to divine ancestry, established Pan-Hellenic cultural bonds through shared narratives, provided ideological explanations for customs and place names, and offered models of excellence for Greek youth. Heroes demonstrated that mortals could achieve extraordinary deeds through excellence, even in a cosmos governed by powerful and often capricious gods. No mythic narrative held greater significance for Greek self-understanding than the Trojan War cycle, an intricate complex of stories surrounding a 10-year conflict between a coalition of Greek kingdoms and the city of Troy in northwestern Anatolia. Although later archaeological evidence would confirm Troy's historical existence and destruction around 1200 to 1180 BC. The Greeks understood these events primarily through myth and epic poetry, most notably Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. The conflict's origins lay in divine machinations at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, parents of Achilles. Eris, discord, uninvited due to her troublesome nature, tossed a golden apple inscribed, "For the fairest," among the guests. 3 goddesses claimed it: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Zeus, unwilling to judge between his wife, daughter, and sister, delegated the decision to Paris, a prince of Troy who was tending sheep on Mount Ida. Each goddess attempted to influence Paris's choice with bribes, Hera offered political power. Athena promised military glory and wisdom, and Aphrodite tempted him with the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Paris awarded the apple to Aphrodite, earning her favor but the eternal enmity of Hera and Athena. When Paris later visited Sparta, he abducted or eloped with Helen, taking her to Troy along with substantial treasure. Menelaus invoked an oath that all of Helen's former suitors had sworn to defend her marriage to whomever she chose, and his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, assembled an expeditionary force of Greek, or Achaean kingdoms. The coalition included numerous legendary figures: crafty Odysseus of Ithaca, aged and wise Nestor of Pylos, the giant Ajax of Salamis, Diomedes of Argos, and the reluctant Achilles, greatest of Greek warriors, whom prophecy had declared essential for victory despite his fated death at Troy. The assembled fleet languished at Aulis due to contrary winds until Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia to appease Artemis, an act that would later prompt his wife Clytemnestra's vengeful murder of him. After false landings and skirmishes, the Greeks established a beachhead near Troy and began what would become a decade-long siege. Homer's Iliad does not narrate the entire war, but focuses on several crucial weeks in its 9th year, centering on Achilles' rage after Agamemnon appropriated his war prize, the captive woman Briseis. Withdrawing from battle in proud indignation, Achilles allowed the Trojans, led by Crown Prince Hector, to push the Greeks back to their ships. Only after his beloved companion Patroclus fell to Hector's spear did Achilles return to battle, slaying Hector in single combat and desecrating his body before finally allowing King Priam to ransom his son's corpse for proper burial. The epic concludes with Hector's funeral, foreshadowing both Troy's fall and Achilles' imminent death. The remainder of the war not covered in the Iliad included several critical events: the arrival of Amazon warriors and Ethiopian forces to aid Troy, Achilles' slaying of Amazon queen Penthesilea and Ethiopian prince Memnon before being killed himself when Paris's arrow, guided by Apollo, struck his vulnerable heel, the suicide of Ajax after Odysseus won Achilles' divine armor in a contest, and the deployment of the infamous Trojan horse. This wooden structure, filled with Greek warriors and left outside Troy's gates as the Greek fleet pretended to abandon the siege, was brought inside the city despite the warnings of Cassandra and Laocoon. At night, the hidden Greeks emerged, opened the gates for their returning army, and sacked the city with exceptional brutality. The war's aftermath scattered both victors and vanquished. The surviving Trojans faced enslavement or exile, notably Aeneas, who escaped to eventually found a lineage leading to Rome, according to later Latin tradition. The returning Greeks encountered varied fates. Agamemnon arrived home to be murdered by Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus. Menelaus and Helen wandered for years before reconciling in Sparta. Ajax the Lesser was drowned by Poseidon for impiety. Diomedes found his wife unfaithful and went to Italy, and Odysseus endured a decade of further adventures before reaching Ithaca. As narrated in the Odyssey, the Trojan cycle provided Greeks with a foundational narrative of collective identity, a proto-national mythology, explaining their common bonds despite political fragmentation. It established ethical paradigms exploring themes of honor, reputation, divine justice, fate, glory, and the tension between individual excellence and communal obligation. Most kingdoms trace their ruling dynasties to Trojan war heroes, lending these myths political significance as charter narratives, legitimizing aristocratic authority. These myths collectively constituted more than mere entertainment. They formed the essential framework of Greek understanding of the cosmos, humanity's place within it, and their own cultural identity. Without state-sponsored religious dogma or sacred texts, myths provided flexible but coherent explanations for natural phenomena, social institutions, and moral principles. The mythic tradition portrayed a world where divine power permeated all aspects of existence yet operated through comprehensible patterns. Gods represented both natural forces and abstract concepts, giving visible form to invisible principles. This mythological system allowed Greeks to conceptualize a universe that, while often harsh and arbitrary, remained fundamentally ordered and intelligible. These narratives also established paradigms of human excellence and limitation. Heroes demonstrated that mortals could approach divinity through extraordinary achievement, yet ultimately remained subject to mortality and fate. This tension between glorious aspiration and inevitable limitation became a defining characteristic of Greek cultural attitudes. Myths united Greeks across political boundaries through shared sacred sites, festivals, and literary traditions. When performed at Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries like Delphi or Olympia, these stories reinforced cultural cohesion among otherwise fiercely independent communities. Athletic competitions and dramatic performances, deeply rooted in mythic narratives, similarly fostered this sense of common heritage. As Greek civilization developed, these myths underwent continuous reinterpretation. Archaic poets systematized them. Classical dramatists explored their ethical complexities, philosophers allegorized them, and historians rationalized them. Yet their essential outlines remained recognizable across centuries, a testament to their fundamental importance in Greek cultural self-definition. The mythic framework established during this pre-literate period would provide the foundation upon which Greece's historical achievements in philosophy, science, politics, and art would later build. When examined as cultural artifacts rather than literal accounts, these myths reveal sophisticated engagement with fundamental questions of existence, the same questions that would later drive Greek philosophical and scientific inquiry, suggesting significant continuity beneath apparent transformation as Greece moved from mythic understanding to more analytical modes of thought. As the mists of mythology gradually clear, archaeological evidence reveals the first complex societies that flourished in the Aegean world. From the dawn of the 3rd millennium to the final century of the 2nd millennium BC, the Bronze Age saw sophisticated civilizations rise and fall, laying foundations upon which later Greek culture would build. The Aegean Bronze Age flourished later than its counterparts in Egypt and Mesopotamia, but developed distinctive cultures with unique technological innovations, artistic styles, and social structures, positioned where 3 continents meet. These early societies thrived through maritime connections that enabled trade and cultural exchange with older civilizations to the east and south. The distinctive geography of the Aegean, a terrain of islands, peninsulas, and intricate coastlines, made seafaring necessary and natural. Maritime trade became the lifeblood of these societies, helping them overcome the constraints of mountainous terrain and limited farmland. Trade routes gradually reached across the Mediterranean and beyond, linking Aegean settlements with Egyptian, Levantine, and Anatolian civilizations. The early 3rd millennium saw a transformative development with the introduction of bronze technology. The copper-tin alloy provided durable tools and weapons that transformed agriculture, craftsmanship, and warfare. Metallurgical expertise became a valuable skill, and control over metal resources conferred significant economic and political power. Bronze also stimulated long-distance trade, as tin was scarce in the Aegean and had to be imported from distant sources. 2 major civilizations dominated the Aegean Bronze Age, the Minoans of Crete and the Mycenaeans of mainland Greece. Though connected through trade and cultural exchange, they developed distinct social structures, artistic styles, and political systems that would exert varying degrees of influence on later Greek culture. The Minoan civilization first appeared on Crete in the early 3rd millennium BC. By the 2nd millennium, it had blossomed into a sophisticated society that would dominate the Aegean until the 15th century. Named after the mythical king Minos by modern archaeologists, this culture established the first advanced civilization on European soil. The absence of defensive walls around major Minoan settlements suggests a relatively peaceful society secure in its maritime power. At the heart of Minoan civilization stood the palace complexes, most notably at Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros. These were not simply royal residences, but multifunctional centers that integrated administrative, religious, storage, and production facilities. The palaces featured sophisticated architectural elements including multiple stories, light wells, elaborate drainage systems, and indoor plumbing that would not be equaled in Europe for thousands of years. The largest palace at Knossos spanned nearly 5 acres with hundreds of rooms arranged around a central courtyard. Its complex layout likely inspired the Greek myth of the labyrinth. The structure included workshops, storage magazines with massive clay jars for olive oil and grain, audience chambers, and residential quarters. Vibrant frescoes adorned the walls depicting scenes of nature, religious ceremonies, and athletic events, including the famous bull-leaping ritual where acrobats performed dangerous feats with bulls. Minoan society developed a hierarchical structure centered on the palaces. At the apex stood a ruler, possibly a priest-king who combined political and religious authority. Palace elites administered a complex economic system that collected agricultural surplus, organized craft production, and controlled foreign trade. Bureaucrats used sophisticated record-keeping systems, first in the undeciphered pictographic script called Minoan hieroglyphic, then in a syllabic script known as lineare, which remains untranslated but appears to record a non-Greek language. Minoan religion centered on female divinities with a prominent goddess often depicted holding snakes or accompanied by animals. Sacred caves, mountaintop sanctuaries, and palace shrines served as worship sites. Religious practices included processions, offerings, and possibly ecstatic rituals suggested by artistic depictions of dancing figures. The frequent bull imagery in Minoan art indicates this animal held special religious significance, perhaps as a symbol of fertility and strength. Minoan artists created works of extraordinary sophistication and naturalism. The palace frescoes revealed a love of nature and movement, depicting marine life, flowering plants, and graceful human figures in vivid colors against varied backgrounds. Their pottery evolved from early dark on light patterns to the distinctive marine style decorated with octopuses, dolphins, and seaweed. Minoan craftspeople also produced exquisite stone vases, delicate gold jewelry, and carved seal stones showing remarkable detail despite their minute size. The Minoans established a maritime commercial empire across the Aegean. Their ships, depicted in art as crescent-shaped vessels with numerous oarsmen, connected Crete with Egypt, the Levant, Cyprus, and the Greek mainland. Minoan influence spread throughout the Cycladic islands, and settlements with Minoan characteristics appeared on islands like Thera, Santorini, and Rhodes. This network allowed the exchange of raw materials, manufactured goods, and cultural ideas throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The mid-15th century BC witnessed a catastrophic decline in Minoan civilization. Many palaces bear the scars of destruction, though scholars debate whether natural disaster, invasion, or internal revolt caused this downfall. The volcanic eruption at Thera a century and a half earlier had already devastated nearby islands, possibly weakening Minoan power through tsunami damage and agricultural disruption. As Minoan influence waned, Mycenaean culture from the mainland filled the void. Even Knossos, the greatest Minoan center, eventually adopted Mycenaean administrative practices and the Greek-based linear B script, while Minoan civilization flourished on Crete. A distinct culture took shape on the Greek mainland. In the centuries following 1600 BC, Mycenaean civilization became the first advanced culture dominated by Greek-speaking peoples. Taking its name from the prominent citadel of Mycenae, excavated by Heinrich Schliemann in the 19th century. This society gradually extended its influence across the entire Aegean world. Unlike the apparently peaceful Minoans, Mycenaean society exhibited a stronger martial character. Their settlements centered on heavily fortified citadels built on easily defensible hills. These strongholds featured massive stone walls constructed of such large blocks that later Greeks attributed them to the mythical Cyclopes. The most impressive example remains the Lion Gate at Mycenae, where a relief sculpture of 2 lionesses flanking a column still guards the citadel entrance. Mycenaean palaces followed a different pattern from their Minoan counterparts. centering on the megaron, a rectangular hall with a central hearth surrounded by columns and access through a porch with columns. This architectural form would later influence the development of Greek temple architecture. The palaces served as administrative centers, seats of royal power, and redistribution hubs for agricultural products and manufactured goods. Social hierarchy appears more rigid in Mycenaean society than in Minoan Crete. At the top stood the Wanax, a king who combined military, political, and religious authority. A warrior aristocracy controlled wealth and power, while specialized craftspeople occupied intermediate social positions. Archaeological evidence and linear B tablets reveal an economy with significant palatial control where administrators recorded detailed inventories of goods, personnel, and production quotas. The Mycenaean elite demonstrated their status through conspicuous wealth and military prowess. The spectacular shaft graves at Mycenae contained lavish burial goods, gold death masks, bronze weapons, amber beads, and intricately crafted jewelry. Later, Tholos tombs, massive beehive chambers built of precisely cut stones, required substantial labor and engineering skill, demonstrating the continuing importance of monumental architecture for expressing political power. Mycenaean culture revealed both indigenous development and considerable Minoan influence, particularly in artistic techniques and religious practices. Fresco painting adorned palace walls with scenes of processions, hunting, and warfare. Pottery evolved from Minoan prototypes into distinctive styles, most notably the pictorial vases showing warriors, chariots, and hunting scenes. Mycenaean craftspeople produced remarkable gold work, carved ivories, and elaborate bronze weapons inlaid with precious materials. The most significant Mycenaean cultural achievement may have been the adaptation of Linear A script to record their Greek language, creating Linear B. Clay tablets preserved by the fires that destroyed the palaces reveal a detailed administrative system, tracking personnel, agricultural production, craft manufacturing, and religious offerings. While primarily administrative in function, these documents provide our earliest evidence of the Greek language and shed light on social structure, economic organization, and religious practices. Mycenaean religion shared elements with both Minoan predecessors and later Greek practices. The Linear B tablets record offerings to deities recognizable from classical Greek religion, including Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Artemis, and Dionysus. Religious activities included animal sacrifice, libations, and processions. Female divinities featured prominently, while local nature spirits and heroes received worship alongside major gods. By 1400 BC, Mycenaean power had expanded throughout the Aegean. They established control over Minoan Crete, occupied islands throughout the Aegean, and established trading colonies or outposts along the coasts of Anatolia. Mycenaean goods have been found throughout the Mediterranean, from Spain to Egypt and the Levant, indicating extensive trade networks. Whether this expansion represented a coherent empire or a cultural sphere with independent kingdoms remains disputed. But Mycenaean influence clearly dominated the late Aegean Bronze Age. The Mycenaean era corresponds roughly with the legendary period of Greek mythology. The citadels of Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, and Thebes feature prominently in tales of gods and heroes. Archaeological evidence lends credence to some mythological elements. The city of Troy was indeed a significant settlement. Massive fortifications did characterize mainland centers, and aspects of material culture match Homeric descriptions. While mythology cannot be taken as reliable history, it preserves cultural memories of this formative period. Daily life for most inhabitants of Bronze Age Greece centered on agriculture. Farmers cultivated the Mediterranean triad of wheat, olives, and grapes, supplemented by barley, pulses, and vegetables. Sheep and goats provided wool, milk, and meat, while pigs and cattle were raised in smaller numbers. Agricultural settlements ranged from isolated farmsteads to substantial villages located in arable valleys and coastal plains. Seasonal rhythms of planting and harvest structured the year. with religious festivals marking critical agricultural transitions. Beyond farming, specialized crafts developed to supply tools, textiles, pottery, and other necessities. Linear B tablets record workers organized by occupation: smiths, carpenters, potters, textile workers, and perfume makers. Some industries, particularly textile production, operated under palace supervision where workers received rations in return for their labor. Other craftspeople likely worked more independently, trading their products in local markets. Both Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations engaged in extensive maritime trade. Merchant ships transported olive oil, wine, textiles, and crafted goods throughout the Mediterranean, returning with tin, ivory, precious stones, and exotic materials. Trade routes connected the Aegean with Egypt, the Levant, Cyprus, Italy, and regions as distant as Central Europe. Archaeological evidence of shipwrecks reveals the diversity of cargo carried by Bronze Age vessels. As the 13th century BC drew to a close, this complex Bronze Age world began to unravel. Within just 2 generations, flames consumed most major palaces and settlements throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Mycenae, Tiryns, Polis, the jewels of Aegean civilization, lay in ruins. Archaeologists have uncovered similar destruction layers at sites stretching from Greek shores to Syrian coastal cities and across Cyprus. This sweeping catastrophe closed the final chapter of the Bronze Age and ushered in a long period of cultural regression known as the Greek Dark Age. The causes of this Bronze Age collapse remain debated. Climate change may have triggered agricultural failures and subsequent social unrest. As evidence suggests, a prolonged drought affected the eastern Mediterranean during this period. Written records from Hittite Anatolia and Ugarit in Syria mention food shortages and attacks by seaborne raiders called the Sea Peoples, possibly displaced groups seeking new homes. Civil conflict and slave rebellions might have contributed to internal collapse, while earthquakes added natural disaster to human calamity in some regions. Whatever the precise combination of causes, the consequences were profound. The Mycenaean palace system disintegrated, taking with it centralized administration, record-keeping, and specialized craft production. Long-distance trade networks fragmented, reducing access to essential resources like tin for bronze production. Population declined dramatically. Urban centers contracted or were abandoned entirely. And technological sophistication decreased. Greece entered a period of diminished complexity and relative isolation that would last for several centuries. The Bronze Age civilizations left an ambiguous legacy for later Greek culture. Direct continuity was broken by the collapse and subsequent Dark Age, resulting in the loss of literacy, architectural techniques, and artistic traditions. Yet cultural memories preserved through oral tradition kept alive awareness of this earlier grandeur. The great heroes of myth, the legendary Trojan War, and tales of wealthy kingdoms provided Greeks of the Archaic and Classical periods with foundational narratives of past glory. Even as they built new forms of social and political organization, quite distinct from their Bronze Age predecessors. In the aftermath of the Bronze Age collapse, Greece entered a period of profound regression. For 3 centuries, from the final years of the 12th century through much of the 9th century BC, Greek civilization retreated from the complexity it had achieved during the Mycenaean era. This Dark Age, as scholars often call it, saw dramatic population decline. The abandonment of once thriving settlements, and the loss of key technologies that had defined Bronze Age achievements. The most striking casualty was literacy itself. The linear B script, used throughout the Mycenaean world to record inventories, offerings, and administrative matters, vanished entirely. The palatial bureaucracies that had employed scribes crumbled. And with them went the need for written records. For nearly 4 centuries, Greece would remain a land without writing, an extraordinary regression for a society that had once maintained detailed administrative documentation. Material culture reflected this decline in stark terms. The sophisticated pottery of the late Bronze Age gave way to simpler styles with less complex decoration. The protogeometric pottery that emerged during this period featured basic circular designs created with compass and brush. Though showing a certain austere elegance in its abstract patterns of concentric circles and geometric motifs, it lacked the artistic sophistication of Mycenaean pictorial styles. Metallurgy similarly regressed, with fewer and simpler bronze objects produced as trade networks that once supplied tin collapsed. Architecture underwent comparable simplification. The imposing palaces with their elaborate frescoes disappeared, replaced by modest structures of mud brick and stone. Even burial practices changed, with simpler graves replacing the monumental tholos tombs of the Mycenaean elite. The overall impression is one of societies operating at a substantially reduced scale and complexity compared to their Bronze Age predecessors. The economic foundations of society contracted dramatically. Long-distance trade diminished to a fraction of its former volume. Egyptian and Near Eastern luxury goods, once found throughout Greece, became exceedingly rare. Trade did not cease entirely. Limited exchange persisted, particularly in the coastal regions and islands. But the extensive commercial networks that had connected the Aegean with distant shores fragmented. Communities became more self-sufficient by necessity, relying primarily on local resources. Political organization underwent radical simplification. The Wanax and his palatial administration vanished along with the complex hierarchy of officials recorded in Linear B documents. Political authority likely devolved to local chieftains or basileis who combined military leadership with religious and judicial functions. These leaders commanded smaller territories and fewer resources than their Mycenaean predecessors. Without writing or bureaucracy, governance became more personal and direct, based on kinship ties and face-to-face relationships rather than institutional structures. Greek society during this period appears to have organized itself around small, relatively egalitarian communities typically consisting of related families or clans. The rigid social stratification evident in Mycenaean records gave way to more fluid arrangements. Though distinctions between elite warrior families and commoners persisted, without centralized authority, local customs and practices gained in importance, contributing to the regional variations that would characterize later Greek culture. Despite the material regression, the Dark Age was not merely a period of loss. In critical ways, it represented a crucible in which elements of what would become distinctively Greek culture began to take shape. As Mycenaean civilization receded, space opened for new social and cultural patterns to emerge. The Dark Age, for all its limitations, witnessed creative adaptations that would influence subsequent developments. Most significantly, this period saw the continuing development of the Greek language, which spread throughout the mainland and islands. While the Mycenaean Linear B tablets record an early form of Greek used primarily for administrative purposes, the Dark Age witnessed linguistic evolution that would ultimately produce the Greek dialects of the historical era. The absence of centralized authority or standardized writing allowed regional variations to flourish, resulting in the dialect groups, Ionic, Doric, Aeolic, and Arcado-Cypriot, that would characterize the Greek-speaking world. The epic poems attributed to Homer, though written down centuries later, preserve memories of this transitional period. The Iliad and Odyssey depict a world different from both the Mycenaean palace civilization and the later city-state culture. They portray a society centered around aristocratic households and personal bonds of loyalty, where kings rule by personal prestige rather than institutional authority. Material details in the poems often present a curious mixture of Bronze Age elements and Dark Age realities, suggesting the oral tradition preserved memories of earlier grandeur while adapting to changed circumstances. This oral tradition proved vital for cultural continuity during a time without writing. Professional bards memorized and performed traditional stories, preserving not just entertainment but cultural memory and social values through formulaic verse and traditional themes. These oral poets maintained connections with the past while making it relevant to their contemporary audiences. When writing was reintroduced to Greece in the 8th century BC, These oral compositions provided much of the content for the earliest Greek literature. Religious practices showed both continuity and change during the Dark Age. The major deities known from Mycenaean tablets remained important, suggesting significant religious continuity despite political and economic disruption. Yet worship appears to have become more localized, with individual communities developing particular rituals and associations with specific gods. Some important sanctuaries, such as Olympia, show continuous religious activity from the Late Bronze Age through the Dark Age, indicating persistent sacred traditions despite broader societal changes. Indeed, sanctuary sites gained particular significance during this period of limited political organization, as centers for communal religious activities. They provided neutral spaces where different communities could interact. The earliest Olympic Games, traditionally dated to 776 BC, emerged from such interactions. Originally a local festival dedicated to Zeus, it gradually attracted participants from an increasing range of Greek communities, helping forge connections across political boundaries. The Dark Age also witnessed important technological innovations despite overall regression. Ironwork technology spread to Greece during this period, gradually supplementing and then largely replacing bronze for tools and weapons. Though iron metallurgy initially produced results inferior to the finest bronze work, it offered significant advantages. Iron ore was more widely available than tin and copper, making the technology less dependent on long-distance trade networks. By the later Dark Age, Greek smiths had mastered techniques for producing high-quality iron implements, establishing a technological foundation for subsequent economic growth. Cremation became a common burial practice, particularly in Athens and parts of Ionia, representing a significant break with Mycenaean traditions. Whether this change reflected new religious beliefs, practical considerations, or external influences remains debated. But it demonstrates that Dark Age Greeks were not simply preserving diluted versions of Bronze Age practices, but developing new cultural patterns. Settlement patterns reveal both disruption and adaptation. Many Mycenaean centers were abandoned or dramatically reduced in size and complexity. Athens represents a notable exception, showing continuity of habitation from the Bronze Age through the Dark Age, though on a reduced scale. In other regions, particularly central Greece and the Peloponnese, settlements relocated to more easily defensible locations, often on hilltops or naturally protected sites, suggesting security concerns in an era of reduced political organization. The final centuries of the Dark Age witnessed gradual recovery from the nadir of the early period. Archaeological evidence from the 10th and particularly the 9th century BC shows increasing population, expanded settlements, and growing material wealth. Pottery designs became more elaborate, metal objects more common, and burials richer in grave goods. Trade began to revive, first locally, then across wider networks. By the late 9th century BC, Greek merchants had re-established contact with the Near East, initiating exchanges that would profoundly influence the coming cultural renaissance. This reviving prosperity created the conditions for significant social and political developments. Growing populations and agricultural surpluses allowed communities to support specialized craftspeople and emerging elites. Competition among elite families drove investment in prestige goods and religious dedications. Economic specialization fostered interdependence between communities, stimulating both trade and conflict. These dynamics would ultimately lead to the emergence of the distinctive Greek polis or city-state that would define the Archaic and Classical periods. Population movements during the Dark Age significantly influenced the linguistic and cultural map of the Greek world. Substantial migrations occurred, notably the movement of Greek speakers from the mainland to the Aegean Islands and the west coast of Anatolia. These migrations established the Aulic settlements in the north, the Ionic cities in the center, and Doric colonies in the south of what would later be called Ionia. Similar movements brought Doric-speaking groups into the Peloponnese. These population shifts help explain the dialect distribution of historical Greece and contributed to the rich regional variations in Greek culture. The late Dark Age also witnessed the formation of ethnic identities that would characterize later Greek history. Communities began to identify themselves as members of broader groups sharing dialect, customs, and putative ancestry. These tribal or ethnic affiliations, Ionians, Dorians, Aeolians, and others, would remain significant throughout Greek history, sometimes uniting communities across political boundaries and sometimes justifying conflict between them. By the early 8th century BC, Greece stood poised for a remarkable transformation. Population continued to grow, agricultural production expanded, craft specialization increased, and trade networks extended. Most significantly, contact with the Phoenicians introduced a crucial innovation, alphabetic writing, adapted to represent the sounds of Greek speech. This writing system would prove far more accessible than the earlier linear B script, leading to much broader literacy and enabling the literary and intellectual achievements of subsequent centuries. The Dark Age, then, represents not merely a gap between Bronze Age glory and classical achievement, but a crucial transitional period with its own distinctive developments. Despite material regression, these centuries saw the emergence of cultural patterns that would shape Greek civilization, the emphasis on local community, competitive social values, religious practices centered on communal sanctuaries, and ethnic identities transcending political boundaries. The Greece that emerged from the Dark Age differed profoundly from Mycenaean civilization, but carried forward selected memories and traditions that would be reinterpreted in light of new circumstances and influences. As the 8th century BC dawned, the foundations for the distinctive civilization of archaic and classical Greece were largely in place. The Greeks had survived the collapse of their Bronze Age predecessors and adapted to changed circumstances. Though lacking the palaces, bureaucracies, and material splendor of the Mycenaean world, they had preserved core elements of cultural identity while developing new social and political forms. The coming centuries would witness an extraordinary cultural flowering built upon these foundations. As Greece emerged from darkness into what historians would later recognize as one of history's most creative epochs, the dawn of the 8th century BC marked a decisive turning point in Greek history. Emerging from the shadows of the Dark Age, Greece entered a period of remarkable transformation that historians call the Archaic Age. Over 3 centuries, from roughly 800 to 500 BC, Greek civilization experienced dramatic growth and innovation across every dimension of society: political, economic, artistic, intellectual, and military. The most profound development of this era was the emergence of the polis, or city-state, a new form of political and social organization that would define Greek civilization. Neither simply a city nor merely a state in the modern sense, the polis represented a unique community that integrated urban center, surrounding countryside, and citizen body into a unified entity with its own laws, customs, and identity. Each polis functioned as a sovereign state, controlling its territory and conducting independent foreign relations. Yet all recognized themselves as part of a broader Greek cultural world. The physical layout of the typical polis reflected its dual nature as both urban community and territorial state. At its heart stood the asti or urban center, typically built around an elevated, defensible location called the Acropolis, originally serving primarily as a refuge during attacks. The Acropolis gradually acquired religious significance as the site of important temples and shrines. Below it developed the agora, an open space that functioned as a marketplace, political gathering place, and social center. Surrounding the urban core lay the chora, or countryside, which provided agricultural land essential for the community's subsistence. The Greek polis thus integrated town and country into a single political entity, distinguishing it from both the palatial states of the Bronze Age and the separated urban centers of contemporary Phoenicia. Each polis developed a unique identity, often traced to mythical founders or divine patrons. Athens claimed the goddess Athena as its special protector and celebrated its ancestral king Theseus. Sparta honored the Dioscuri, the divine twins Castor and Pollux, and attributed its distinctive constitution to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus. Corinth traced its origins to Sisyphus, while Thebes claimed foundation by the hero Cadmus. These foundation myths provided symbolic unity and historical legitimacy, connecting citizens to a shared past and distinctive destiny. Despite their fierce independence and diverse origins, the emerging polis recognized their participation in a common Hellenic culture. Four particular elements defined this shared identity. Language, with all communities speaking Greek despite dialectical variations. Religion, with common gods and festival practices. Descent, with most communities claiming connection to the mythical Hellenic tribes. And lifestyle, particularly customs surrounding athletics, symposia, and civic participation that distinguished Greeks from non-Greeks. *Barbaroi*. The scale of the early polis remained modest by modern standards. Even the largest, like Athens, Corinth, or Syracuse, contained only tens of thousands of citizens. Most numbered their citizen populations in the mere thousands, or even hundreds. This small size fostered direct participation in political affairs and created intense social bonds, but also generated fierce competition for limited resources. Tensions between neighboring polis frequently erupted into warfare, establishing the pattern of inter-Greek conflict that would persist throughout classical history. The reintroduction of writing stands as one of the most consequential developments of the early Archaic period. Adapting the Phoenician alphabet, Greeks created the first writing system to fully represent vowel sounds, dramatically increasing its accessibility and versatility. Unlike the complex linear B script, restricted to specialized scribes, alphabetic writing could be learned relatively easily and applied to multiple purposes. Initially used primarily for poetry, property marks, and dedicatory inscriptions, writing gradually expanded to include laws, treaties, commercial records, and ultimately the full range of literary and philosophical texts that distinguish Greek civilization. This new literacy made possible the crystallization of Greek cultural foundations. The epic poems attributed to Homer, the Iliad and Odyssey, achieved written form in the 8th century BC after centuries of oral transmission. These works provided Greeks with models of heroic behavior, a common mythological heritage, and an exploration of fundamental values like honor, excellence, and mortality. Alongside Homer, Hesiod's Theogony systematized divine genealogies and cosmic history, while his works and days offered practical and moral wisdom for farming communities transitioning to the more complex social structures of the polis. The early Archaic period witnessed significant population growth throughout the Greek world. Archaeological evidence reveals both the expansion of existing settlements and the foundation of new communities. This demographic pressure, combined with limited arable land in the mountainous Greek landscape, created conditions that would drive one of the most remarkable phenomena of the age, overseas colonization. Beginning in the mid-8th century BC and continuing for over 200 years, Greek communities dispatched organized expeditions to establish new polis throughout the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions. Unlike the later imperial colonies of modern European powers, Greek colonies were founded as independent communities, complete replicas of their mother cities, but politically autonomous from their inception, though maintaining cultural and religious ties to their metropolis or mother city. Colonies developed their own civic identities and frequently pursued independent, sometimes even conflicting policies. The scale of this colonial movement transformed the Mediterranean world. Greek settlements appeared along the coasts of southern Italy and Sicily, earning the region the name Magna Graecia, or Greater Greece. Colonists established outposts along the shores of the Black Sea, southern France, eastern Spain, North Africa, and even reached as far as the Atlantic coast of modern Portugal. By 500 BC, hundreds of Greek polis dotted Mediterranean coastlines, spreading Hellenic culture, trade networks, and political institutions across 3 continents. colonization provided multiple benefits for Greek society. It relieved population pressure by offering land to those who might otherwise face poverty or landlessness. It secured access to vital resources unavailable or scarce in mainland Greece, such as timber, grain, or metals. It expanded trade networks and opened new markets for Greek goods. Perhaps most significantly, it exposed Greeks to diverse cultures and ideas, stimulating intellectual development, while simultaneously strengthening their sense of shared Hellenic identity through contrast with non-Greek peoples they called barbaroi. This extensive colonization coincided with and contributed to dramatic economic expansion. Maritime trade flourished as Greek ships connected far-flung colonies with the mainland and each other. Agricultural production intensified with greater specialization in cash crops like olive oil and wine intended for export. Craft industries developed, producing distinctive pottery, textiles, and metalwork traded throughout the Mediterranean. Wealth increased significantly, though its distribution remained uneven, often concentrating in the hands of landowning aristocrats or enterprising merchants. A crucial economic innovation of the Archaic period was the introduction of coinage. Adopted from Lydia in western Anatolia in the early 6th century BC, coins minted from electrum, gold, and silver rapidly spread throughout the Greek world. Each polis typically issued its own currency bearing distinctive symbols reflecting civic identity. Athens marked its coins with Athena's owl, Corinth with Pegasus, and Rhodes with its emblematic rose. Beyond practical advantages for trade, coinage had profound social implications, facilitating more abstract economic relationships and creating new possibilities for wealth accumulation beyond traditional land ownership. These economic developments contributed to significant social changes. The traditional aristocracy, whose status rested on landed wealth and claims to distinguished ancestry, faced challenges from new groups whose prosperity derived from trade, manufacture, or specialized agricultural production. Social mobility increased, though aristocratic families generally maintained substantial advantages. In most polis, a broader category of middling citizens emerged, either aristocrats nor impoverished laborers, but independent farmers and craftsmen with sufficient property to equip themselves for military service and participate meaningfully in civic affairs. Military organization underwent fundamental transformation during this period with the development of hoplite warfare, named for their distinctive equipment, including a large round shield, hoplon or aspes, and heavy body armor. Hoplite infantry fought in a tightly packed formation called the phalanx. This combat style emphasized collective discipline over individual heroics, with each warrior protected partly by his own shield and partly by that of his right-hand neighbor. Successful phalanx warfare required extensive training and mutual trust among warriors who needed to maintain formation under the extreme stress of close combat. The hoplite revolution carried profound social and political implications. Since hoplites typically provided their own equipment, military service became linked to property ownership, with each community's defense resting primarily on middle-class citizens who could afford the considerable expense of bronze armor, weapons, and shield. This military reality strengthened the position of the middling element in society and provided leverage for their eventual political empowerment. The experience of fighting shoulder to shoulder in the phalanx also reinforced civic identity and equality among citizens, creating bonds that extended from battlefield to political assembly. Early archaic political structures typically featured aristocratic dominance, with power concentrated among noble families who claimed superior birth and dominated religious offices, judicial functions, and military leadership. Various councils and magistracies provided governance, though participation remained restricted to elite circles. This aristocratic phase, however, proved transitional in many polis as economic changes, military developments, and social tensions generated pressure for broader political participation. The 7th and 6th centuries BC witnessed a sequence of political experiments across the Greek world. Many communities experienced periods of tyranny, ruled by individuals who seized power unconstitutionally, often with popular support against aristocratic factions. Despite their negative connotation in later Greek thought and modern usage, many early tyrants like Cypselus of Corinth, Cleisthenes of Sicyon, or Pisistratus of Athens implemented popular policies, sponsored public works, promoted religious festivals, and patronized arts and culture, though typically establishing family dynasties. These tyrannies generally lasted only 1 to 3 generations before giving way to broader constitutional arrangements. Other communities developed distinctive political systems without experiencing tyranny. Most famously, Sparta evolved its unique dual kingship, Council of Elders, Gerousia, Assembly of Citizens, *Capella*, and powerful magistrates called ephors in response to internal crises during the 7th century BC. This complex constitution, attributed to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus, created remarkable stability at the cost of radical social regimentation and the brutal subjugation of the Helot population who worked the land. While Spartan citizens devoted themselves to military training, Athens followed a different path toward constitutional government. After early written laws attributed to Draco proved excessively harsh, Solon implemented far-reaching reforms in 594 BC that laid foundations for later Athenian democracy. His measures included debt cancellation, prohibition of debt slavery, creation of property classes for political participation, establishment of a popular court, Heliaea, and codification of laws. Though falling short of full democracy, Solon's reforms broadened political participation beyond the aristocracy and established principles of citizenship that transcended narrow kinship groups. After an intervening period of tyranny under Pisistratus and his sons, Athens experienced its final pre-classical political transformation through the reforms of Cleisthenes in 508 to 507 BC. By reorganizing the citizen body into 10 artificial tribes that mixed residents from different regions of Attica, Cleisthenes broke the power of traditional kinship groups and created new civic structures based on territorial residence rather than birth or wealth. His system introduced the principle of rotation in office, broadened participation in the Council of 500, and strengthened the sovereign authority of the citizen assembly. These innovations established the framework for classical Athenian democracy that would fully mature in the following century. Religious practice during the Archaic period became increasingly structured around community sanctuaries and public festivals. Major temples began to replace smaller shrines, with wooden structures giving way to monumental stone architecture. The distinctive Greek temple form evolved, characterized by columned porticos, rectangular plans, and sculptural decoration that narrated mythological scenes. These buildings served not merely as houses for deity images, but as visible manifestations of civic pride and prosperity. Communities invested enormous resources in temple construction, competing to create the most impressive monuments to their patron deities. The growth of Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries represents one of the period's most significant religious developments. Sites like Olympia, Delphi, Nemea, and Isthmia grew from local shrines to major religious centers, attracting visitors from across the Greek world. These sanctuaries hosted athletic competitions and religious festivals that fostered Hellenic identity across political boundaries. The Olympic Games, traditionally founded in 776 BC, expanded from a local festival to a quadrennial event, drawing participants from communities throughout Greece and its colonies. Victory in these prestigious competitions brought honor not just to individual athletes, but to their home polis, making athletic accomplishment a matter of civic pride. The Oracle of Apollo at Delphi gained particular significance during this period, serving as both a religious center and diplomatic neutral ground. Considered the navel of the world, Delphi attracted pilgrims seeking divine guidance on matters ranging from personal health to major political decisions. Communities consulted the oracle before establishing colonies, making constitutional changes, or embarking on military campaigns. The oracle's cryptic pronouncements, delivered by the Pythia in states of apparent divine possession, required interpretation that allowed for flexible application while maintaining divine authority. Beyond its prophetic function, Delphi housed treasuries built by various polis to display wealth and commemorate victories, making the sanctuary a showcase of interstate competition and artistic achievement. Artistic expression flourished during the Archaic period across multiple media. Pottery evolved from the simple geometric styles of the late Dark Age to increasingly elaborate black figure technique in the 7th century BC, followed by red figure innovation in the late 6th century BC. These vessels combine practical function with artistic beauty, depicting mythological narratives, athletic competitions, and scenes from daily life that provide invaluable evidence of Greek culture. Elite symposia, or drinking parties, stimulated demand for elaborate craters, kylikes, and other wine vessels decorated with scenes appropriate to the occasion. Sculpture underwent dramatic development from rigid, stylized forms toward increasingly naturalistic representation. Early archaic kuroi and korai, statues of nude young men and draped young women, displayed the characteristic, archaic smile and frontal stance. Influenced by Egyptian models but evolving toward distinctively Greek styles. By the late 6th century BC, sculptors had achieved greater anatomical accuracy and suggested potential movement, laying groundwork for the classical revolution in artistic representation. These sculptures served various functions: grave markers, votive offerings, architectural decoration, but consistently emphasized the idealized human form rather than individual portraiture. Architecture developed distinctive orders: Doric, Ionic, and later Corinthian, each with characteristic proportions, column designs, and decorative elements. Major temples incorporated increasingly sophisticated engineering to create impressive interior spaces while maintaining structural stability. The combination of practical construction knowledge with aesthetic principles of harmony, proportion, and mathematical relationship produced buildings of enduring beauty. Alongside religious structures, civic buildings like stoas, colonnaded porticos, bullaturia, council houses, and theater spaces began to define the urban landscape of developed polis. Intellectual life showed similar dynamism, particularly in Ionian Greek communities of western Anatolia. Here thinkers like Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes began seeking natural rather than mythological explanations for cosmic phenomena. These early philosophers proposed various primary substances, water, the boundless, air, as fundamental principles underlying observed reality. Their speculations, though often seeming primitive by modern standards, represented revolutionary intellectual innovation by subjecting natural processes to rational analysis rather than attributing them to divine action. This Ionian intellectual ferment expanded beyond physical speculation to encompass mathematics, geography, and medicine. Pythagoras, though shrouded in legend, established a community that combined mathematical investigation with religious practices. Early medical thinkers began developing empirical approaches to health and disease, laying foundations for the Hippocratic tradition. Hecataeus produced geographical works describing lands and peoples throughout the known world, combining practical knowledge with critical evaluation of traditional beliefs. These diverse intellectual currents shared a common emphasis on systematic observation and rational explanation that would characterize Greek approaches to knowledge. Poetry diversified beyond epic to include new forms addressing contemporary concerns. Lyric poets like Archilochus, Sappho, and Alcaeus explored personal emotions and social values in more intimate forms than heroic epic. Elegiac poets Tyrtaeus and Solon addressed civic values and political situations directly relevant to their communities. These new poetic expressions reflected the increasing individualism of the age while simultaneously helping forge collective values appropriate to polis society. By the close of the 6th century BC, Greek civilization had undergone profound transformation from its Dark Age nadir. The polis had emerged as a distinctive form of social and political organization. Economic prosperity had increased dramatically through agricultural intensification, craft specialization, and expanded trade networks. Literacy had spread beyond narrow elite circles. Monumental architecture and sophisticated artistic traditions had developed. Rational inquiry had begun challenging mythological explanations. Most significantly, Greek cultural consciousness had crystallized around shared values and practices while simultaneously celebrating the distinctive identities of individual communities. This archaic synthesis created the conditions for the extraordinary flowering of classical Greek civilization in the 5th century BC. The Persian Wars, which would usher in the Classical Age, tested and ultimately confirmed the vitality of the cultural and political innovations developed during the Archaic period. The Greeks, who faced the massive Persian invasions of 490 and 480 to 479 BC, had forged political communities, military organizations, cultural values, and shared identity capable of withstanding even the greatest empire of the day. Their remarkable resistance would open the way for what historians later recognized as one of the most creative periods in human history. As the 5th century BC dawned, the Greek world stood on the threshold of its most brilliant era. The innovations of the Archaic period, the mature polis system, hoplite warfare, overseas colonization, artistic development, and intellectual inquiry, provided foundations for an extraordinary cultural flowering that would reshape Mediterranean civilization. This classical period, extending from the Persian Wars to the rise of Macedon, witnessed both the pinnacle of Greek achievement and the self-destructive tendencies that would ultimately compromise Greek independence. Two states emerged as the dominant powers of this era, each representing contrasting models of social and political organization: Sparta and Athens. Their different approaches to governance, education, and military affairs offer a study in opposites. Yet each proved remarkably successful within its own terms. Sparta evolved from an ordinary Greek community into a unique military society through a process of deliberate transformation. After its difficult conquest of neighboring Mycenaean in the 8th and 7th centuries BC, Sparta faced the challenge of controlling a vast enslaved population that outnumbered Spartan citizens. The Helots, as these state-owned serfs were called, worked the fertile Mycenaean plain and provided agricultural surplus that supported the Spartan system. But their justified resentment posed a perpetual threat of revolt. The Spartan response to this dilemma was to reorganize their entire society around military needs. Every aspect of a Spartan citizen's life became subordinated to martial effectiveness. The system attributed to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus implemented radical measures designed to create perfect warriors and minimize internal distinction. At age 7, boys were removed from their homes and enrolled in the agoge, a rigorous training system that emphasized physical hardening, military skills, endurance, and absolute obedience to authority. They learned to endure hunger, cold, and pain without complaint, to survive by stealth and cunning, and to value collective discipline above individual achievement. This educational system produced warriors of unmatched discipline and fortitude, but at considerable social cost. Literacy, music, and other cultural pursuits received minimal attention. Luxury and comfort were discouraged as softening influences. Citizens dined together in communal messes, syssitia, rather than with their families, sustaining military camaraderie while weakening household bonds. Each adult male citizen belonged to a syssition, a military dining club of about 15 men who fought together in battle, creating intense bonds that superseded family loyalty. Sparta limited citizenship to full-blooded Spartans who successfully completed the agoge and maintained their contribution to the communal messes. As citizenship demands increased, Spartan numbers declined steadily from a peak of perhaps 8,000 adult male citizens in the early 5th century to fewer than 1,000 by the 4th century BC. This demographic fragility became a critical weakness as Spartans could not easily replace battlefield losses. Politically, Sparta developed a mixed constitution that combined elements of monarchy, oligarchy, and limited democracy. Two hereditary kings from different dynasties shared power, primarily serving as military commanders and religious officials. The Gerousia, A council of 28 elders plus the kings proposed legislation and acted as a supreme court. 5 annually elected ephors wielded extensive executive power, supervising the kings and implementing policy. The assembly of all citizens could vote on proposals but not initiate or amend legislation. This complex system, with its checks and balances, provided remarkable stability at the cost of conservative resistance to change. Spartan women enjoyed greater freedom and authority than their counterparts elsewhere in Greece. They received physical education, managed estates while men focused on military duties, and could own property in their own right. The famously direct speech of Spartan women became legendary throughout Greece. However, their primary social value remained the production of strong sons for the state, with mothers supposedly telling sons departing for battle to return, with your shield or on it, victorious or dead, but never fleeing. By the early 5th century BC, Sparta had established hegemony over most of the Peloponnese through a network of alliances known as the Peloponnesian League. Member states agreed to follow Spartan leadership in foreign affairs while maintaining internal autonomy. This alliance system, combined with Sparta's fearsome military reputation, made it the preeminent land power in Greece on the eve of the Persian Wars. Athens followed a dramatically different path. While Sparta turned inward and embraced radical conservatism, Athens evolved toward democracy, commercial dynamism, and cultural innovation. The reforms of Cleisthenes in 508 to 507 BC reorganized the Athenian citizenry into 10 artificial tribes, cutting across traditional kinship groups and regional factions. This new organization provided the framework for democratic institutions that would mature in the following decades. The Athenian democracy rested on direct participation by the citizen body. The ecclesia, or assembly, meeting at least 40 times annually on the Nix hillside, made major policy decisions, declared war, ratified treaties, and elected certain officials. Any adult male citizen could attend, speak, and vote. A council of 500, with 50 members from each tribe selected by lot annually, prepared business for the assembly, handled routine administration, and supervised magistrates. Hundreds of administrative positions were filled by ordinary citizens chosen through a combination of election and lottery, usually serving one-year terms. The courts similarly involved direct citizen participation. Large juries of 201 to 501 citizens chosen by lot heard both private lawsuits and public prosecutions without professional judges or lawyers. Citizens presented their own cases with time limits enforced by water clocks. After hearing arguments, jurors voted immediately without deliberation, with a simple majority determining the verdict. While imperfect by modern standards, this system prevented the concentration of judicial power and gave ordinary citizens direct involvement in upholding the law. This democratic system evolved gradually through the 5th century BC. Ephialtes and Pericles further reduced aristocratic influence by transferring powers from the Areopagus, a council of ex-magistrates, to the popular courts and assembly. Compensation for government service, introduced by Pericles, allowed poorer citizens to participate in the democracy by offsetting the income lost while attending the assembly or serving as jurors. By mid-century, Athens had developed the most radically democratic system of government in world history to that point. Yet, Athenian democracy had significant limitations by modern standards. Citizenship remained restricted to adult men with Athenian parentage, excluding women, resident foreigners, medics, and slaves. Indeed, the democratic system partly rested on slave labor that freed citizens for political participation. Women, while enjoying greater legal rights than in many ancient societies, could not vote, speak in the assembly, or represent themselves in court. These restrictions reflected the ancient world's hierarchical assumptions rather than unique Athenian failings. But they remind us that Athenian democracy differed substantially from modern conceptions. Daily life in classical Athens centered on the household and the city. The oikos or household constituted the basic social unit, typically including family members, slaves, and material possessions under the authority of the male head of household. Men divided their time between household management, civic duties, and social interactions in the agora, gymnasiums, and symposia. Women of citizen families managed household affairs, supervised slaves, raised children, and produced textiles. Their public role was largely restricted to religious festivals and family ceremonies. Though practical realities often required broader activities, especially for women of lower economic status who might engage in market trading or paid labor. Education for Athenian boys combined physical training through athletics with musical education that included poetry and instrumental skills. Upper-class youths might continue their education with sophists who taught rhetoric and other valuable skills for civic life. Girls typically received domestic training at home rather than formal education. After military service from ages 18 to 20, young men of citizen families entered public life, beginning their participation in the democratic institutions that governed the state. The Persian Wars transformed the Greek world, and particularly Athens. When the mighty Persian Empire launched punitive expeditions against the Greeks, first under Darius in 490 BC, and then under Xerxes in 480 to 479 BC. Few expected the fragmented Greek states to prevail. The Greek triumph against overwhelming odds became a defining moment in Hellenic identity and Athens' democratic self-conception. The conflict originated in the Ionian Revolt of 499 to 494 BC, when Greek cities along the western coast of Anatolia rebelled against Persian rule. Athens sent ships to support the rebels, an act that attracted the attention of the Persian king Darius. After crushing the Ionian rebellion, Darius launched a punitive expedition across the Aegean. His forces captured several islands before landing at Marathon, some 26 miles from Athens. At Marathon, in 490 BC, Athenian hoplites under the command of Callimachus and Miltiades achieved a stunning victory against a larger Persian force. The heavily armed Greek infantry charged across the open plain and broke the Persian lines, inflicting heavy casualties. According to tradition, a runner named Phidippides carried news of the victory to Athens, collapsing from exhaustion after delivering his message, the inspiration for the modern marathon race. This unexpected victory bolstered Athenian confidence and emphasized the effectiveness of hoplite warfare against Persian infantry. Darius died before mounting another expedition, but his son Xerxes assembled a far larger force to punish the Greeks a decade later. The Persian invasion of 480 BC represented the largest military operation the Greeks had ever faced. Herodotus claimed the Persian army numbered in the millions, certainly an exaggeration, but even revised modern estimates suggest a force of over 100,000 troops plus a substantial navy. Faced with this existential threat, many Greek states chose submission, providing the earth and water Xerxes demanded as symbols of surrender. Others, led by Sparta and Athens, determined to resist. Putting aside their significant differences, 31 Greek states formed an alliance and developed a coordinated strategy under Spartan leadership. The first major engagement occurred at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, where a small Greek force led by Spartan king Leonidas attempted to block the Persian advance. For 3 days, the Greeks held the pass against repeated Persian assaults. Their final stand, after a local trader revealed a mountain path that allowed the Persians to outflank their position, became legendary. Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, along with some Thespians and Thebans, fought to the death, buying time for the remaining Greek forces to retreat. Simultaneously, the Greek fleet engaged the Persian navy at nearby Artemision with inconclusive results. With central Greece lost, the Allies withdrew to the Isthmus of Corinth. Athens was evacuated, its population temporarily relocated to the island of Salamis and other safe locations. The Persians occupied and burned Athens, destroying temples and public buildings on the Acropolis. In this dark moment, the decisive naval battle of the war occurred in the narrow strait between Salamis and the mainland. The Athenian leader Themistocles convinced the reluctant allies to fight at Salamis rather than withdrawing to the Peloponnese. Through strategic deception, he maneuvered the larger Persian fleet into the confined waters where its numerical advantage became a liability. The more maneuverable Greek triremes inflicted a crushing defeat on the Persian navy, destroying perhaps half their ships. Xerxes, watching the disaster from a throne set up on the shore, soon retreated to Asia with a portion of his army, leaving his general Mardonius to continue the campaign the following year. The final major battle occurred at Plataea in 479 BC, where the largest hoplite army ever assembled, led by the Spartan regent Pausanias, decisively defeated the Persian land forces. On the same day, according to tradition, Greek forces destroyed the remnants of the Persian fleet at Mycale on the Anatolian coast. These victories effectively ended the Persian invasion, though fighting would continue for decades as Greeks took the offensive in a series of campaigns to liberate Ionian cities. The Persian Wars had profound consequences for Greek civilization. The unexpected victory against overwhelming odds reinforced Greek confidence and sharpened their sense of cultural superiority over non-Greeks they called barbarians. The shared struggle temporarily transcended chronic interstate rivalries, establishing a brief moment of Hellenic unity. Most significantly, the war fundamentally altered the balance of power among Greek states, elevating Athens to unprecedented prominence. Athens emerged from the Persian Wars with its prestige enormously enhanced. While Sparta had contributed the overall commander and the largest contingent of hoplites, Athens had provided the bulk of the navy that proved decisive at Salamis. When Sparta withdrew from offensive operations against Persia, Athens stepped forward to lead a coalition of island and coastal states determined to continue the fight. This alliance, formed in 478 BC and known to modern historians as the Delian League, would become the vehicle for Athenian imperial ambitions. Initially, the Delian League operated as a voluntary alliance with headquarters on the sacred island of Delos. Member states contributed ships or money toward the common goal of liberating Greek cities from Persian control and securing the Aegean. Early campaigns under Athenian leadership proved highly successful, defeating Persian garrisons and expanding the alliance to include most island and coastal states in the Aegean and eastern Mediterranean. Gradually, however, the nature of the alliance changed. Athens began treating contributions as tribute due to a superior rather than shared expenses of allied states. When members like Naxos attempted to withdraw from the alliance, Athens used force to compel continued participation. The treasury was moved from Delos to Athens in 454 BC, symbolizing the transformation from equal alliance to Athenian empire. By mid-century, most allies had converted from providing ships to paying tribute, leaving Athens with overwhelming naval supremacy in the Aegean. This period of imperial growth coincided with the flourishing of Athenian democracy at home. Under the leadership of Pericles, who dominated Athenian politics from 461 to 429 BC without holding extraordinary powers, Athens experienced a golden age of cultural and intellectual achievement. Pericles combined aristocratic birth and education with firm democratic convictions, advocating both imperial ambition abroad and democratic participation at home. The wealth flowing into Athens from imperial tribute and commercial dominance funded an ambitious building program that transformed the city's appearance. After the Persian destruction of the Acropolis, Pericles initiated reconstruction on a far grander scale. The Parthenon, dedicated to Athena Parthenos, exemplified the new architectural vision with its perfect proportions, subtle mathematical refinements, and magnificent sculptural program. Other structures followed. The monumental gateway called the Propylaea, the elegant temple of Athena Nike, and eventually the distinctive Erechtheion with its famous caryatid porch. Together with public buildings in the Agora and the long walls connecting Athens to its port at Piraeus, these projects employed thousands of workers and showcased Athenian wealth and artistic skill. This building program reflected both religious piety and civic pride, but also had explicitly political dimensions. Pericles diverted some 30 talents annually from the Delian League treasury to fund Athenian construction projects, justifying this on grounds that Athens was fulfilling Allied defense responsibilities. This financial reallocation provoked criticism from both allies and conservative Athenians, but exemplified how imperial resources supported Athenian domestic policy under Pericles. The same era witnessed Athens' greatest achievements in drama, both tragedy and comedy. The tragic playwrights Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides composed works exploring human suffering, moral dilemmas, divine justice, and political themes. Performed at religious festivals like the city Dionysia, these plays combined poetic language, music, dance, and theatrical spectacle in a uniquely Athenian art form that attracted visitors from throughout the Greek world. Meanwhile, comic playwrights like Aristophanes created biting political satire, outrageous obscenity, and fantastic plots that offered both entertainment and pointed social commentary. Through drama, Athenians publicly examined their most cherished values and controversial policies, demonstrating the free expression that characterized democratic culture. Historical writing emerged as a distinctive literary form during this period. Herodotus, a native of Halicarnassus who spent significant time in Athens, composed his histories primarily to document the Persian Wars, but included extensive ethnographic and geographical digressions about the many peoples involved in the conflict. His wide-ranging curiosity, relative openness to non-Greek perspectives, and focus on human motivations established a distinctive approach to understanding the past. The Athenian Thucydides, writing about the later Peloponnesian War, developed a more analytical methodology, emphasizing political and military affairs, critically evaluating sources, and seeking underlying patterns in human events. Together, these pioneering historians established Western historical writing as a genre distinct from myth, epic, or religious narrative. In the visual arts, Athenian red figure pottery reached its technical and artistic peak, while sculptors developed increasingly naturalistic representations of the human form. The statesman Phidias directed the sculptural program of the Parthenon, and created the massive gold and ivory cult statue of Athena that stood inside the temple. Polykleitos of Argos established mathematical canons of proportion for depicting the ideal male form. The trend toward naturalism accelerated through the century, with sculptors achieving greater anatomical accuracy, convincing drapery, and emotional expression. The intellectual climate of classical Athens encouraged philosophical inquiry and critical debate. While earlier Greek philosophy had flourished primarily in Ionia and southern Italy, Athens became the center of intellectual life by the mid-5th century BC. Anaxagoras brought natural philosophy to the city and influenced Pericles before being forced into exile for impiety. The sophists, traveling professional educators like Protagoras and Gorgias, taught rhetoric, argumentation, and other practical skills to ambitious young men while questioning traditional moral and religious assumptions. The most significant philosophical figure of the era, Socrates, developed a distinctive method of questioning that challenged conventional wisdom and examined the foundations of knowledge. Though he wrote nothing himself, his approach to ethical inquiry transformed Greek philosophy. Through relentless questioning, Socrates exposed contradictions in his interlocutor's thinking and sought precise definitions of moral concepts like justice, courage, and piety. His influence spread through the young men who followed him around Athens, including some from prominent families. This association, along with his questioning of traditional beliefs, eventually led to his trial and execution in 399 BC on charges of corrupting the youth and impiety. Socrates accepted the verdict rather than fleeing, establishing a model of philosophical integrity that profoundly influenced subsequent Western thought. The growing wealth and power of Athens inevitably generated tension with other Greek states, particularly Sparta and its allies. The two systems represented diametrically opposed values: Athens democratic, commercial, innovative, and maritime; Sparta oligarchic, agricultural, traditional, and land-based. For a time, a formal peace between them maintained an uneasy balance, with each predominant in its own sphere. However, friction increased as Athens consolidated its maritime empire and intervened in disputes among Sparta's neighbors. The resulting conflict, the Peloponnesian War, would last with interruptions from 431 to 404 BC, ultimately involving nearly every Greek state and permanently altering the Hellenic world. Thucydides, who both observed and participated in the war, identified its fundamental cause as the growth of Athenian power and the fear which this caused in Sparta. The immediate trigger involved complex disputes among secondary states allied with the two powers, but the underlying tensions had developed over decades. When war finally erupted, the opposing sides pursued contrasting strategies matching their distinctive strengths. Sparta and its allies, superior in land warfare, invaded Attica annually, ravaging the countryside and destroying crops in hopes of drawing the Athenians into a decisive hoplite battle. Athens, following Pericles' strategy, refused this confrontation. Instead, the population withdrew behind the city walls while the navy maintained maritime supply lines and conducted raids on Peloponnesian coastal territories. This approach minimized Athens' main military weakness, but imposed severe strain on the population, crowded within the city and exposed to disease. The early war saw no decisive engagements, but terrible suffering. A devastating plague struck Athens in 430 to 429 BC, killing perhaps a quarter of the population, including Pericles himself. The loss of the statesman's steady guidance led to less coherent leadership and more erratic policy decisions. Nevertheless, Athens maintained its basic strategy and avoided decisive defeat during what historians call the Archidamian War, the conflict's first phase. After years of inconclusive fighting, both sides accepted the Peace of Nicias in 421 BC, intended to last 50 years, but ultimately holding for just 6. This breathing space benefited Athens, allowing partial recovery of its strength. But underlying tensions remained unresolved. Aggressive leaders on both sides, particularly the charismatic Athenian general Alcibiades, soon pushed for renewed confrontation through provocative alliance arrangements and interventions in previously uninvolved regions. The pivotal moment came in 415 BC when Athens launched its fateful Sicilian expedition, an enormous military operation targeting Syracuse, the powerful Greek city-state in Sicily. Thucydides described the fleet's departure as the most costly and splendid Hellenic force that had ever been sent out by a single city up to that time. Despite warnings from the elderly General Nicias, the ambitious campaign proceeded under his reluctant leadership alongside Alcibiades and Lamachus. Almost immediately, the expedition faced difficulty when Alcibiades was recalled to stand trial for allegedly profaning religious mysteries, rather than returning to certain prosecution. He defected to Sparta and advised them on how best to oppose Athenian strategy. The remaining commanders besieged Syracuse, but failed to achieve quick victory. When Sparta sent aid under Gylippus, the tide turned decisively against the Athenians. Despite desperate reinforcement under Demosthenes, the entire expedition ended in catastrophe, with thousands of Athenians killed or captured and sold into slavery. This disaster gravely weakened Athens at a critical moment. Sensing opportunity, Sparta renewed offensive operations with increased vigor. On Alcibiades' advice, they established a permanent fortification at Decilia in Athenian territory, disrupting agriculture, commerce, and access to the silver mines at Laurium. This phase, called the Decilian or Ionian War, saw Athens struggling to maintain its empire as allied states began to revolt. Spartan operations in the eastern Aegean, supported by Persian funding, increasingly challenged Athenian naval supremacy. Political turmoil compounded Athens' difficulties. In 411 BC, oligarchic sympathizers overthrew the democracy and established the short-lived regime of the 400, though quickly replaced by the more moderate 5000. This constitutional disruption revealed deep divisions within Athenian society. Full democracy was restored by 410 BC, but factional tension persisted. Athens enjoyed temporary resurgence under the rehabilitated leadership of Alcibiades, who had changed sides again. Several naval victories suggested the possibility of negotiated peace on favorable terms. However, after a subordinate commander suffered defeat at Notium in 406 BC, Alcibiades was blamed and driven into exile once more. At Arginusi, Athens won its last major victory. But controversy over the failure to rescue sailors from damaged ships led to the trial and execution of 6 generals, depriving Athens of experienced leadership. The decisive battle came at Aegospotami in 405 BC, where the Spartan admiral Lysander captured nearly the entire Athenian fleet, while crews were ashore. This naval catastrophe left Athens defenseless. Without control of the sea lanes, the city soon faced starvation under Spartan blockade. By spring 404 BC, Athens surrendered on harsh terms: demolition of the long walls and fortifications, surrender of all but 12 ships, acceptance of Spartan leadership, and recall of exiled oligarchs. The Delian League was dissolved, and Athens' maritime empire collapsed. The aftermath brought further suffering to Athens. A Spartan-backed oligarchic regime known as the 30 Tyrants, led by Critias, executed or exiled democratic supporters and confiscated property from wealthy citizens. Their brutal rule lasted only about 8 months before exiled Democrats under Thrasybulus defeated them in a brief civil conflict. Remarkably, the restored democracy implemented a general amnesty, forbidding prosecution for most actions during the oligarchic period. This act of political reconciliation helped heal civic divisions and allowed Athens to recover much of its cultural and economic vitality, though its imperial power was permanently broken. Beyond Athens, the Peloponnesian War transformed the Greek world. Sparta emerged as the dominant power, but proved ill-equipped for imperial leadership. Without Athens' naval experience or administrative systems, the Spartans struggled to maintain order among former Athenian allies. Their heavy-handed governance, military occupations, and support for narrow oligarchies generated widespread resentment. The emancipation of Messenia in 369 BC would eventually deprive Sparta of its economic foundation and reduce it to second-rate status. But long before then, its brief hegemony faced serious challenges. Persian influence increased substantially in the eastern Aegean, with the great king playing Greek states against each other through diplomatic machinations and selective financial support. The Peace of Antalcidas in 387 BC explicitly acknowledged Persian control over Greek cities in Asia Minor, a humiliating concession that highlighted how internecine conflict had weakened the Greek poesy tie-in relative to their old adversary. Thebes emerged as a significant power in the early 4th century BC under the leadership of Epaminondas and Pelopidas. Their revolutionary military tactics, particularly the deepened left wing of the phalanx, proved decisive at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, where they shattered Spartan military prestige. Theban campaigns into the Peloponnese freed Messenia from Spartan control and established allied democracies in Arcadia. For a brief period, Thebes exercised hegemony in central Greece before Epaminondas fell at the Battle of Mantinea in 362 BC. Athens partially recovered its prominence, forming a second Athenian confederacy in 377 BC that briefly revived some aspects of its former naval power. However, this alliance was explicitly structured to prevent the abuses that had transformed the Delian League into an empire, with formal guarantees of member autonomy. When Athens nevertheless began treating allies imperially during the Social War of 357 to 355 BC, the confederation disintegrated, ending Athenian prospects for renewed hegemony. This era of shifting alliances and inconclusive conflicts created a power vacuum in the Greek world. While the major polis exhausted themselves in warfare, a previously marginal kingdom in northern Greece was quietly building its strength. Under the leadership of Philip II, who gained the throne in 359 BC, Macedon would fundamentally alter the course of Greek history, bringing an end to the classical age of independent city-states and initiating a new chapter in Mediterranean civilization. The conclusion of the Peloponnesian War left the Greek world profoundly transformed. Athens, stripped of its empire and much of its power, struggled to recover from devastating defeat. Sparta, triumphant but ill-suited for hegemonic leadership, attempted to impose its will on former Athenian allies. The political landscape that had defined the 5th century disintegrated into a more fluid arrangement of shifting alliances, rising powers, and foreign intervention. Sparta's victory in 404 BC established it as the dominant Greek power, but its attempts to exercise leadership revealed fundamental weaknesses in Spartan imperial capacity. Under commanders like Lysander, who had engineered the final victory over Athens, Sparta installed narrow oligarchies loyal to Spartan interests in many former Athenian allied states. These dikarchies, or governments of 10, backed by Spartan military governors called harmas, generated widespread resentment among local populations accustomed to greater autonomy or democratic governance. The Spartan approach reflected both ideological commitment to oligarchy and practical limitations of Spartan society. The small citizen body, continuing to shrink due to property requirements and battlefield losses, could not provide sufficient manpower for direct administration of a far-flung empire. The Spartan educational system, focused exclusively on military training, had not prepared its citizens for complex financial or diplomatic management. Most fundamentally, the Spartan ethos, centered on military discipline and isolation from corrupting foreign influences, proved incompatible with the cosmopolitan engagement required for successful imperial leadership. These contradictions soon produced conflict between Sparta and its former allies. Corinth and Thebes, which had fought alongside Sparta against Athens throughout the Peloponnesian War, became increasingly alienated by Spartan high-handedness and ambition. When King Agesilaus II embarked on ambitious campaigns in Asia Minor against Persian interests in 396 BC, he unwittingly triggered a reaction that would ultimately undermine Spartan power. Persia, the great empire to the east, had played a decisive role in the Peloponnesian War by providing financial support to Sparta's final naval campaigns. King Artaxerxes II now reversed this policy, dispatching the Athenian admiral Conon with Persian funds to build an anti-Spartan coalition. Persia's gold proved as effective against Sparta as it had been against Athens, financing a coalition of Thebes, Corinth, Argos, and a reviving Athens to challenge Spartan dominance. The resulting Corinthian War, 395 to 387 BC, marked the first major challenge to Spartan hegemony. Initial Spartan victories at Nemea and Chaeronea demonstrated continued land warfare superiority, but Conon's naval victory at Cnidus in 394 BC broke Spartan control of the Aegean. The conflict dragged on inconclusively for years, draining resources from all Greek participants while Persian influence steadily increased. The war's resolution came through Persian diplomatic intervention rather than decisive battlefield victory. The Peace of Antalcidas, also called the King's Peace, imposed terms dictated by the Persian monarch and enforced by Sparta. This settlement explicitly recognized Persian control over Greek cities in Asia Minor, a humiliating concession that sacrificed the freedom of Eastern Greeks, while mandating autonomy for all other Greek states except Persian-controlled Cyprus and Clazomenae. The principle of autonomy, seemingly idealistic, actually served Spartan interests by justifying the breakup of opposing coalitions, particularly the emerging Boeotian Federation led by Thebes. This settlement restored temporary Spartan predominance, but at significant cost to Pan-Hellenic interests and Sparta's own moral standing. By collaborating with Persia against fellow Greeks, Sparta betrayed the legacy of the Persian Wars and its own tradition of championing Greek freedom. This moral compromise, combined with increasingly heavy-handed interventions in other Greek states, accelerated the erosion of Spartan prestige and legitimacy.